Okay, this is the first tutorial in getting started with the Red Orchestra 2 software development kit, SDK. To install the SDK, you have to own the game, obviously, but you're going to go over to Library, Tools, and find it in this vast array of tools that are probably available if you own even just a few games. The Red Orchestra 2 SDK, you're going to right-click on it. That would say Install Game if it wasn't already installed. And then you're ready to go. You can launch it from here. You can launch it from your library, however you want to do it. I already have it open here, so let's get started. First thing we're going to do, this is the basic interface for the SDK. This is going to be our 3D preview window here. You can customize this however you want. This is going to be our top-down view, and then over here I've got two different side views set up. The content browser is going to be one of the main things you use when you're doing your levels, but essentially this is how you interact with all the packages that are involved, all the content that's involved with the game. And if you want to add your own content, this is how you would import it, bring it in. We'll get into all that later. First thing we'll start out though, let's just start a new basic level and kind of set up just the basics to even just spawn into the game. So we're going to start a new level. We're going to go to New. You'll choose Additive, which is the default selection here. And it's not going to change anything because it's already just a blank level. So here we are. It's our blank 3D world. This is what everything starts out with. This red cube here is your builder brush, which you may or may not even use right off the bat, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. The first thing I like to throw down when we're doing a new level is just a terrain, so we have at least some base or something to work with. So one section of the content browser over here, we're going to be using a lot actor classes. So we'll click on that tab. We will go down to Info, expand that, and then here you see Terrain. So I'm going to select Terrain. Now I'm going to go back to, you can use any of the views. Typically I use my 3D viewport for this. Right click wherever, and we're going to click Add Terrain here. There's several ways to do this. Much like everything in this, there's several ways to do just about everything. So once you get your feet wet, figure out the best way you like to do it. But I'm going to click on Add Terrain here. And now we're going to add terrain. To move around in the 3D viewport, you're going to hold down right click, and then you can move around with your WASD keys, just like you're going to fly around. Hold down right click, and I'm just flying around. So here's our basic terrain. It's pretty small right now. What we're going to do, just to expand this a little bit, there's a few ways to do this also. The easiest way I find to do it, you can either double click the terrain itself, or you can hit F4 with the terrain selected. Either way, you're going to get to the terrain's properties. And what we're going to go to up here, we can search for the different properties. This is a small terrain. It only has 4 patches. So I'm just going to blow this up to 100. And it's a little bit bigger now. We've got some distance in the horizon or whatnot. So here is the terrain. Now you'll see there's nothing on it. It's blank. There's no dirt, grass, whatever. I'm going to show you real quick how we add materials to the terrain. Okay, we've added our terrain. We've increased the size slightly. And now what we want to do is add some sort of material to the terrain so it looks like real world, not this weird default material. So what we're going to do is go back over to our content browser. We're going to use the search feature. A quick tip as well, when you first open up the SDK, pretty much every time, you're going to want to right click on this external folder and tap fully load. You're going to have to probably do that several times. It might take a minute or two. And what that'll do is it'll actually populate all the packages in the game into the content browser. Even then, sometimes it doesn't, and you have to go out and find the one you want, but that's for a future lesson, I suppose. I've already fully loaded a couple times, enough to find what I want here. I'm just going to search for grass. Here we go. What I want is a material. So either these material or material instances. So here we have the Barashka grass. We'll go ahead and use that. So I'm going to select the grass. There's several ways to do this. If you search online, you'll find several ways. You'll find all sorts of opinions. This is just the way I do it, and it might not be the best, but it's the way I do it. So I'm going to open up the terrain tool, which is the mountain. Now here you see right now all we have is a height map, which is why we have nothing on it. So what I'm going to do is right click over here, new terrain setup layer from material auto create. So it's going to use whatever I have selected over here, and it's going to create a new terrain layer. So I just click that. Takes a second to do its thing, and then boom, we've got our grass. And now this automatically creates this in our maps package, which we haven't saved yet. So it's just called this generic name. But it automatically creates the terrain material, which you can mess with later, and the terrain layer setup, which is what we have right here. So if we go back to our 3D view, you can see we have the grass, and sometimes things tile well, sometimes they don't. We'll get into painting the terrain and things like that a little bit later, some more advanced stuff. So anyways, here we have the grass on there, so it looks like the real world. Something we'll touch on real quick too is modifying the shape of the terrain. So here we have different size tools with different radiuses, radii, whatnot. What I'm going to do here is just pick the big one. I'm going to lower the strength down, otherwise it'll just be way overkill. And here's where paint, when you're applying it to either the base layer or the height map, doesn't really paint because it's already there. It actually affects the terrain. So what I'm going to do here is hold down the control key, and I'm going to left click, and you can see that's adding some height there. If I click the wireframe view, you can see it. So we can make some peaks, valleys. If you want to take away from the terrain, we've left click with control, you right click with control, and then you get a divot or a ditch or whatnot. If you want to delete an area of terrain, you'd click on this empty box, and you could delete different areas of terrain. And there's different reasons you'd want to do that, but for now we'll keep it all just simple. And that's the section on adding materials and kind of sculpting the terrain a little bit. Okay, we've finished with the basic terrain lesson. We'll move on to maybe the most important thing I can impart to you in this entire lesson. Placing down a static mesh. A static mesh is just a model. It doesn't move, it's static. Mesh is just the fancy term for the model. So what we'll look for is pretty much, we can click on this. This is the filter for the content browser. So if I click on all, I'm getting everything. If I click on static meshes, I'm getting all the static meshes. What do we have here? We got this gun. We'll throw down one of these. What you absolutely do not want to do, and I will repeat that for emphasis, do not do this ever, is drag a static mesh from the content browser onto the map. It'll work and it'll place it there, but you do that enough times, it's going to cause all sorts of problems with your map. If I can just show this to you real quick, when you place these down, they should be this light blue color. This one is yellow, and it's yellow because it's not a static mesh. It's by default placed down as this static mesh obstacle. The word obstacle should raise some red flags. It interferes with gameplay, some of the bot pathing when we get down the road, when you make your map friendly for bots. You place enough of these down in a map, it will even render it unusable online. It won't even work on a server. And I can tell you all this because I've done all these mistakes. So absolutely never drag anything from here. What you're going to want to do, there's a couple things you can do. The easiest is to click it, and then wherever you want to place it, I'm going to hold down the S key, and I'm going to left click. And as you can see, it's now blue, and it's a static mesh actor, which is exactly what we want. So that's one way to do it. That's the very easy way. Another way you can do it is right click where you want it, add actor, add static mesh prop, and then you'll see the name of the prop here. Here's the static mesh obstacle, which we don't want, static mesh prop. Boom. So I can do it right there as well. A couple other things you can see, I have got the 3 arrows coming out. This is the kind of the movement widget. I can move it about different axes, axi. I can do 2 at once, although that's not always real helpful. Other things you can do, not necessarily with this mesh, but some things you might want to scale, windows, doors, things like that to fit. This is the scaling tool, so I can blow that up, make it smaller, make it tiny, and then the other option is the rotation widget, which is also very handy. So I can spin this around. You know, this model itself doesn't lend itself to much manipulation, but other ones would. So that is placing down a static mesh. Now everything you place in your level will be typically a static mesh. Trees, bushes, blown up houses, cars, things like that. And this is just the basic way to do that. Now that we've placed down some meshes, what we are looking at right now is unlit mode, where it just shows you everything in the level. The lighting plays no effect on this. In fact, this map has no lighting. So if we were to switch to lit mode, there's no light. It's all dark. We can't see anything. So at the very least in your map, you're going to want some sort of natural light. Even on a nighttime map, there's a little bit of natural light. So let me show you real quick how to add light to the map. We go back to the Actor Classes tab. This time, instead of info, we're going to go down to light. And for the natural occurring sunlight, moonlight, whatever time of day it is, light in every map, you're going to want what we call a dominant directional light. So under light, directional light, dominant directional light, you're just going to place it anywhere on the map. It doesn't matter where. The only factor really when you place it is the angle at what the light comes in at. So I'm going to right click, add the dominant directional light. A lot of people will scale this up simply to make it easier to see. Can't do it that way, I'm sorry. Go to its properties and the draw scale. This doesn't affect anything other than the icon. So if I want the icon to be big so I know where it's at on the map at all times, I can see it. Typically people will place it up in the air, but you can see that big blue arrow coming out. That's the direction that the light is shining. So we do not want, for this map, you know, you may, if it's high noon or something like that, want it facing that direction. I don't. We're going to, you lose a lot of shadows when you have no angle to the light, and it doesn't look very natural. So what I typically do is go into my rotation widget, and I'm just going to turn it. So maybe it's, you know, 6 o'clock in the evening or something like that. This is the way the light is going to shine, in a natural way, just sort of ambient, dominant light. And other things you can do, we can change the color of the light. By default, it's white. We click on, we can type in color. So by default, it's this white, kind of boring. You can change your RGB values here if you know exactly what you want. Or if you just click on this light bar, you'll get this handy little color picker. So we can switch it to more of pinkish yellow. And shadows. Typically, you know, most shadows in real life are not pitch black. We'd want to kind of change the color of those as well. So that's all set up. The dominant light's in there, and we're in lit mode now. But what we're seeing here is a preview. The SDK is just kind of showing you how the light, our little pinkish yellow light, will kind of look in this world. The only way to really see how it's going to look is to build the light. So to build the light, typically I go out of lit mode. You want to work almost exclusively in unlit mode. Even if you have some super duper computer, running the SDK in lit mode just really bogs it down typically. And as you'll learn, I'm sure it prones it to crashes, which it's prone to anyways. So that kind of mitigates the crashing a little bit if you keep it in unlit mode. But to build light, we're going to go up here. There's different levels of light. The preview's the quickest to build. The production's the longest, but it's also the highest quality. Typically, you won't really need production lighting until you're done with the map or wanting to see maybe how good it looks or whatnot. So I'm just going to do preview. You can click build all. When there isn't much in the map, it doesn't take long to build the lighting. So usually a preview quality lighting on almost empty map is only going to take a few seconds. This all depends on your computer as well. For the bigger finished maps in production, I might take 9-10 hours to build light. I've heard other people taking days, so it just kind of depends. Okay, now that the lighting has finished building, this will pop up anytime you build lighting. It's the swarm agent. You can just close that out when it's done. And you can see once the map's built, we get these errors. We can ignore all this stuff for now. We'll get into all that later. But anyways, we can go back now to our map and click on light mode, or lit mode, I'm sorry. And we can see now the map has some light. There's our Zis guns. They look much better in lit mode than they just do in the unlit mode. We've got a little bit of a shadow under there. Shadows always look very poor in the SDK. A lot of times you'll work on a map and build the lighting and just think the shadows are awful and missing in places. They always look bad in the SDK. You really have to go into the game to see the quality of shadows you want. So don't worry about that if the shadows look poor. But anyways, there's our map. We get the contours here and things like that. So that's the basic light, the dominant directional light added to the map. Okay, now that we're done with the lighting, we're going to move on to adding player starts and kind of messing with the Kismet. This is what will be needed to just make a basic playable game, and I'll just touch on the tip of the spear here. But what we're going to need for this is that builder brush, that red square, which you can see is way out there. Sometimes, especially when you get a lot of stuff on your map, you're not going to be able to find it. So you're not going to know where it's at. The easiest thing to do is just make a new one. So there's never more than one builder brush on the map at once. What I typically do, this is just a little shortcut tip, I guess. If you click on any static mesh, any of them, I'll click on this one. We've only got a couple on here. Then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to right click on the cube. And that's going to bring this up, brush builder. So it's cube. That's what, and there's different shapes. We want the cube for this one. These are the default values. It's a square box, or square cube, 256. These are the Unreal units. We'll get into that a little bit more later. But essentially, you're just going to click build. Now look what it did. It put the brush right near where I had the selected. So now I don't have to hunt for it. Now sometimes it's hard to click it, or it's underground and you don't realize it. A lot of times you'll have to come over here to the top-down view to be able to see it. But I'm just going to click it right here. We couldn't even find it anyways. There it is. It's very small. Okay. We've got it selected. Now you can see part of it's above ground, part of it's below. That's typically what you want when you are making what we're making now is a spawn volume. In the SDK, it's called a player start group, but this is how we make the spawn volume. So what you want to make sure is it covers the entire area where the player is going to be able to spawn. If it's up in the air, you'll have problems. If it's below ground, you'll have problems. And but once we've got it where we want, we're going to build a volume. Now there's numerous different volumes that you'll use, blocking volumes and spawn protection volumes and things like that. They're all located here in this cube. So there's a lot of icons that look very similar. There's a bunch of cubes. These are where your volumes are. So I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to go down to RO, or you can use RS depending on what game type you're working with. RO, player start group, if I can find it. I'm sorry, RO volume player start group right here. And what it's going to do is convert my brush into that. So it's there. I move the brush off of it and you can see it here. So this is the RO player start group. Now that's the spawn volume. In this game you have to specifically set every spot where a player could spawn. And these are called RO player starts, actors or something like that. So we're going to grab one from over here, if I can remember even where they are. Navigation, player start. Here we are. We got RO and RS. I I guess there's a WF one too, but I typically use all RO. You'll notice when you start messing with this, a lot of the Rising Storm stuff inherits directly from Red Orchestra stuff, so you're not going to screw anything up, and there's been plenty of maps made with a mixture of both. But we've got the RO player start group. I'm just going to right click anywhere in the volume, and I'm going to put add actor RO player start group. So it's here. What I want to do is make sure I don't have players spawning like 6 feet above the ground and breaking their legs. So with it selected, I'm going to tap the end key, which is, I guess it's close enough there. But you can see if I had it way up here, I would tap end, boom, it snaps me right down to the terrain. And now what we can do here, and it's getting a little difficult to see, it's a little bit easier here, you can see we're within our bounds still. If we put a player start out here, it won't do anything. It won't even be part of the spawn. Another quick tip, to copy things quickly, you can use your standard Control-C, Control-V. In this SDK and with UDK in general, you can hold down Alt and drag something. So I've clicked, hold down Alt, I can drag it. Now I've got 2 of them here. Boom, now I've got 4. This is a very good way to quickly populate this type of thing, or maybe you're making a cornfield and you've got a bunch of corn stalks you're going to add. Usually what I'll do as well, we've got perfectly flat terrain here, but a good habit to get into, once you've made whatever you're going to make, drag them all up just a hair and hit end, I'll snap back to the terrain, because maybe you have a little hill right here and you don't want this guy hanging up in the air and spawning into midair. So we've got this, and what we're going to do is now we've got to go to Kismet. So Kismet is this K up here. Kismet is the logic behind your game. It doesn't really require any knowledge of any Unreal script or anything. It's very simplified, a visual tool to set up the level. So we'll click on Kismet. It's empty, so it's just this big empty thing. If you really want to see a good example of Kismet, open up any vanilla map and just look at the Kismet setup for it. There's a lot of really neat things you can do with Kismet. A lot of maps just have very basic, simple Kismet. It just depends what you want to do. But a great tool or reference is just to look at the basic maps and see how they did things. So what we're going to do, we're going to set this up so we can spawn into the game, and that'll complete this lesson. But what I'll do is I'm going to select the player start group here. Now this is how I get it into the Kismet. I've got it selected, so now when I right click anywhere in the Kismet, I can place it. So we got the object variable, and we're zoomed way out here. Okay, so the most basic things we want to be able to start the map is we need the player, we need the level loaded. So the level loaded, a good habit to get into is to disable all your player start groups at the beginning of the map. It's most important when you're using, when you have like a 2-round map. Otherwise, a lot of times maybe your spawn protection from the end of the round before didn't get disabled and it screws up. It's still lingering for the second round. So just a good habit to get into, disable everything right off the bat, which is what I'm going to do here. And then I will, and you can do Control-C, Control-V, similar stuff in Kismet. So Control-C, Control-V. I'm now going to enable it, and we're just going to make this allies. Okay, another good habit I don't like to get into is referencing the same variable with 2 different nodes. Normally it doesn't matter. There's a couple edge cases where it does kind of affect things and it screws with the logic. So typically I just like to have every one of these on its own. So we've got it disabled right off the bat, and then it's instantly enabled when the level starts, and it's going to be allies. Okay, now that we've got a couple of the basic Kismet properties set up, we're going to go now to the additional back-end settings we need to take care of before we can spawn in the world properties. World properties is just kind of like the info for the map. The basic things we need to select are my map info down here. It's set to none. What we want, we're going to make this a Red Orchestra map. You can set game type for Pi. Pi stands for Play and Editor. It's not necessary though. Sometimes you have different game types set up. You're going to want to bounce around in the Pi when you're testing it. But okay, we've got the RO map info set. We'll get into some of this other stuff later, but this is where you set like reinforcements, time limit for the map, different types of artillery or mortars, resets on recon, cooldowns and things like that. We're going to be doing a territory map. It's typically the most common. Here we can set up who's defending. We'll get into all that later too. But we've got the allies player spawn here, so what we're going to do at a minimum to spawn in, we're going to need a role set up. This is one of the more time-consuming and tedious tasks when you're doing the map. I have been told that in Rising Storm 2 this will be much more simplified and you won't have to hand pick a million of these things. Usually, you know, a lot of maps have 40, 50 roles for each team, depending on how many riflemen they have. So we're picking the Allies team commander. So since it's a Red Orchestra map and we're on the Allies, we want RO role info Allies commander, which my eyes are burning trying to read all this. Here we go. That's set up. Now, if I remember correctly, you don't have to have a squad populated, but if we don't, I think it'll crash the SDK when we try to play it. So typically this is what I do, and like I said before, there's a lot of ways to do this stuff. RO squad info is what we want here because we're doing an RO map. And for me, I'm going to set up one squad. There's no one in it. It's empty. This is just for testing here. And I'm going to make a blank fire team. So we got one fire team. Let's see if that works and doesn't crash anything. So that's done. We're going to do it. I'm going to save this and give it a name. So right now it's untitled because it's never been saved. So it has nothing. Since I'm going to make it a territory map, I'm going to call it, usually you would create a folder with the map's name, and then inside it is where you'd save the map. We're just doing a little test here. So since it's a territory map, I'm going to save it with that prefix TE, and we'll call it test map. How about that? You can call it whatever you want, and that'll save it. Typically doesn't take too long to save, even on the bigger maps. But okay, so now it's called TE test map, and that prefix will let the game know what type of game it is later. But you know, there's firefight and countdown and things like that, and you can have the same map with different game types. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So we've got test map. Now what I'm going to do to see if this works or doesn't crash or whatnot, there's different ways to spawn into the game if you're going to play in the editor. One of them involves clicking this, I think. Typically what I just do is right click, play from here.